Hey everybody, Ember Cargo. This is Kahlief here. We're going to talk about Ghosts of Tsushima. We have a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to that particular game. I think, let me give some background really quick on how the review went for us and for me. I think there's a couple of things that go along with a review like this. So Sony, shout out to Sony first of all. Shout out to the folks over at PlayStation for giving us a copy early. Shout out to them for including us in this conversation in a real way, because again, it's not one of those things that is I don't not recognize the privilege that I have to be able to do this work, and to have folks like Sony support it by giving us codes for some of the biggest games that they have on the planet. So that's the baseline of that part of the conversation. We had codes for maybe about 2 weeks prior to the embargo date, which was yesterday. And that was a good amount of time to be able to like run through a game like this. I think, the ideas around the embargo and of course like what you can say versus what you can't say is always a part of the conversation. It's always difficult to kind of figure out the way you want to talk about a thing versus, how you've been able to play it. And I think to a certain extent, it's a lot more difficult to kind of consolidate those thoughts once you've had a good time to sit down with a thing. I think my anticipation for the game was very, very high when I first saw what they were trying to go for with Sucker Punch. I think Sucker Punch continues to do really good work in the space. I was always a big fan of Second Son and a big fan of the Infamous series and all the stuff that they had there. But I was always a little bit worried about this particular game because it didn't seem like it was going to be something that was going to hold my attention for as long as a game like Last of Us or kind of longer story based narratives that they have in the space. And it was one of those things that when I first started to play it, I was like, okay, I can see the vibe of where this thing is going. I can see the idea of what's going to happen. I kind of understand exactly what they're trying to go for from a narrative perspective. And I think to a certain extent that the main takeaway and the reason why I talked about this on Twitter and said I gave the game a 2 out of 5 was I feel like this would have been a perfect game if it wasn't a open world game. Like, not perfect in the sense of like the narrative or the way that they told story. I think in terms of the way that they could have broached this kind of a conversation and broached this story with a new IP, with a new game, they could have narrowed it down to a much smaller scope, and it probably would have benefited everyone involved in terms of the storytelling, in terms of the way that the game is going to be shared and the way that the game is going to be talked about. Because there was just a lot of stuff in the game that didn't need to be there. So, from a narrative perspective, you're part of this clan. You're part of the Sakai clan, and this is not this. This is stuff that's like in the conversation, and it's not spoilery. Like, this is stuff that's in the like beginning first part of the game, and it's not something that is giving away anything in any real way. But there's basically these two clans. The Sakai clan is the one that you wind up being in as the main character, and then there's a clan that is a part of your like family clan. And the main thrust of the whole entire story is around this idea around honor, and the ideas around honor, in the way that you not only play the game and the systems that fundamentally bring that game up, but the way that you then kind of talk to folks, and the way that you kind of play with other people, right? Um, or play with the other characters within the space. And I think to me, what fell flat was the conversations that were had between characters never really felt like it gave enough weight. It never really felt like it was one that I actually cared about the characters in the space. I never really felt like I wondered about the motivations of the characters, nor did I care about them once I kind of got through the process of playing the main storyline. I will say this. It is by far the most beautiful game on the system. I'm going to show a little bit of footage, and it's kind of like sparse gameplay that would have been in my actual like other review anyway. Again, if you want to dip out, totally fine. If you don't want to see any of it, you have like a minute and a half to be able to do so. Because I'm going to show a couple of quick game clips that I captured while I was playing. It is by far the most beautiful game on the system. It is by far one of the prettiest games I've ever seen on the PS4. Like, they have done things with lighting, they have done things with grass and with scale and with some of that stuff that I have never seen before. It is like stunning in a visual way, the way this game winds up happening. I think that is to its benefit. It makes me again wonder what this game is going to look like on the PS5. Like, for as much as I didn't care for this particular game, I want to play it again on PS5 to see what it looks like from a visual standpoint, which to me is fantastic. One of the things you're kind of watching right now is there's these sections of gameplay where you kind of scope out a fight. And you scope out kind of like places and ways that you can attack the enemies that you have. So like you'll see, of course, exploding barrels. You have these things that are kind of like these wasps. You can shoot the wasp with your arrow so that they attack the other people in that space. I love this part of the gameplay. The problem is you don't do it enough. You only really do it once or twice during the time that not once or twice. You do it a couple of times throughout your gameplay, but it doesn't hold enough weight to be able to have enough of it in the space. Like you want more of that in that particular thing. One of the other parts, and this is one part where it connects to the beginning parts of a conversation. One of the major parts of this game that I found to be really frustrating was, and I'm going to pause it for 1 second. Actually, I'm going to take it off screen for a second. One of the major aspects of this game that they talked about from a gameplay standpoint that was supposed to be one of the things that you latched onto was the conversation between you being, the honorable samurai versus the ghost samurai. And that ghost samurai was supposed to be the one that kind of uses these not honorable tactics, kind of like fighting people from behind, not really doing anything that seems like it's going to be out of the way of the samurai's order. And that part to me was really interesting because you start the process, and this particular scene is where you first have your first moment where you do a ghost thing, right? And it's cool because it like shows this really dope part where you're like having this fight internally that you're going to have. And for the most part through the rest of the game, you don't have any more of those moments. Like you have those moments with other people in the story, but it really doesn't affect gameplay at all. It doesn't have any kind of merit in a way that makes you have to think about or change tactics, or there's no repercussions for it in the way that you interact with that part of the story. Like you just don't do anything with it, which I find to be really, really kind of like kind of whack, because it was a thing that was gonna be the thing that made you want to figure out ways to use different tactics to be able to fight different kinds of characters, so that you in your mind were doing this kind of paragon or or evil kind of path. um and it just never did any of that, and I was like, so why did you even why is that even a part of the gameplay loop, that you would have that part of that conversation but it never really even does anything. um Again, like, you can see how beautiful this thing looks. It's fantastic in the way that the lighting is on this game. Like, they've done some really cool stuff with that part of the gameplay and with that part of the mechanic. I think that stuff is really, really good. It just feels like they added systems to the game in theory, but they don't come through in fruition. One other part that I thought was actually really dope, is actually the thing I really like about the game, and I think is probably the best part of the game, actually, because the fighting in this game isn't that good. It's not that interesting. You learn a couple of different styles. You kind of build up your styles throughout the time that you play by doing side quests and speaking to very specific people in the game. And then you have some of these little like extra side quests where you learn very special tactics and special moves and stuff like that, which from a gameplay standpoint is open world fare. Like, you've seen that happen in every open world game to this point anyway. The problem is that the best combat is when you have these kind of one-on-one fights. So let me show you what one of those looks like. So around the world, you have these fights where you kind of like have these standoffs. And again, like, looking at the graphics in this thing, like the wind and everything else and the grass, it all looks gorgeous. And you have these one-on-one fights, which are probably the best fights in the game. Like, there's not a lot of them, but you have enough of them where you kind of learn, how to balance out your tactics and your stances and all this other stuff. And you have this dance that you do with the other characters when you're fighting against them. And that part is pretty brilliant. Like, those parts are really fun because you're actually trying to figure out tactics when you fight those people. Most of the other fights that you wind up getting to in the world, it's literally a lot of button mashing. Depending on what style the other person is exhibiting, you have a style that will counter that style. So sure, you'll run up against someone who has a shield. So there's there's a stance that deals better with shields. You'll have people who run up to you with spears. You have one that's better against spears. So at a certain point, you're not going to get really overwhelmed by, the combat, because you're going to see who's in the space, determine what you're going to be able to do, single them out, kite them away sometimes, and then take those folks down with that particular style that you have. Exactly. Keylok in the chat says, so like Arkham combat. Yeah, absolutely. It's like that. And to a certain extent, Arkham combat is really cool because it flows faster. You're bouncing from place to place to place, from person to person. You're doing that kind of fight. This, you're not really doing that at all. Like, you really don't have that thing where you're doing that kind of dance in that same way, which makes it a little bit boring, to be honest. Like, I was really excited to have these like really dope cinematic fights, and it doesn't really do anything for you. So it's like, there isn't a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of bloat. There's a lot of side quests that really don't add anything to the story. You're taken across all these conversations and all these different people who you meet throughout your travels, and they don't really do anything either. Like, I'm not gonna say if there are boss fights or not, because I think that there's like, I don't want that to be a part of I don't want that to be a spoiler. There are folks that you fight that you meet throughout the story, so I'm not gonna say if there are boss fights or not. But I think you have a main baddie who is the head of the Mongol army, and even the conversation between he and some parts of your clan they're not that impressive. They don't really do that much. They don't like that main baddie is an interesting character. I think it's well acted. I think it's well played. In comparison to your character, which I don't think is actually played well. I just think that character, the main character, just doesn't have enough meat on the bone to be compelling in the way that we've seen other characters in that way be compelling. One other gameplay mechanic that I think was really interesting that they kind of fell short on is Let me restart this. So actually, let me restart this again. So there is a mechanic that happens, and this is kind of like on the honor system side of the samurai way, right? So like there's this theory that when you are a samurai and you have a fight, you standing up to your opponent face to face, mano y mano, and saying, I'm going to fight you and I'm going to kill you and I'm going to, start this battle. They have a mechanic in there that lets you basically do a standoff. So you'll walk into a big enclave of people. You literally hit a button on the D-pad that says standoff. It shows up on your screen. And then you have one of these moments that you see right here where you have to time when you're supposed to strike. So the person who is fighting against you will strike. And then if you're holding down your button, if you let it go in between the time where that person's lunging at you, you get an insta kill. So in theory, it's kind of cool, right? Because you are like doing this thing that's supposed to be this real like dope macho moment where it's like this really honorable thing. The problem is, like, you can do it all the time when you roll up into any enclave, right? And then at a certain point, you get strong enough that you can do that move to a couple of different people during that moment. So it like does this bullet time thing where all these people kind of roll at you and they come at you. You can kill up to probably like 3 of them in that moment. So then those 3 folks are out of the fight and out of the battle, and then you roll through and just kill all the other people in the fight. That gets really boring quick because there is no difference in the way that the enemies approach you. There is a small difference that, again, you'll see that towards the longer you play it. There's a very small difference, but it doesn't add any new wrinkles to the fight. It doesn't add any new techniques that you have to learn. It doesn't add any new tactics that you have to try to figure out. And that part doesn't really do anything for this really badass moment that you're supposed to have in that space, which is kind of disappointing in a lot of different ways. I played on the English version. I didn't play with the Japanese dub or with the Japanese audio on. I mean, I think this game is fantastic for folks who are Japanophiles. Like, if you love Japan, you love Japanese culture, and you love samurai culture, you love samurai movies, like, this is the game for you in some ways. Like, there was a huge part of the conversation about the Kurosawa mode that turns everything kind of black and white and grainy, and I put it on, and to be honest, that doesn't add anything either, unless you really care about the homage that they're trying to portray. And the weird thing about it is, like, this game is so pretty and beautiful. It's a cool thing to add, but it made me not want to use it because everything is so gorgeous around you. Like, I did it a couple times during some of those solo fights and then never turned it on again because it didn't really add anything to the moment. Music, fantastic. I think it has a fantastic soundtrack. I think that the music adds a bunch to it in a different way. I think that the solo fights, the solo duels are fantastic. I think, again, it's the most beautiful game on the console right now. Like, it blows Last of Us out of the water in terms of how pretty it is. It has one of the coolest photo modes in the game. I've showed a whole bunch of photos in on our Twitter feed to showcase some of that stuff off. But to be honest, in the grand scheme, it's a fairly boring game. Like, I was really disappointed in what I had a chance to kind of play through. And it sucks because Sucker Punch put a lot of time and effort into this game. It's not like they didn't. I always want to give people props for the work that they do, but it feels like it just didn't hit. Like, the actual coolest, some of the coolest moments that you have don't have anything to do with the main story, nor do they have to do with your character. And the only emotional investment that you really have in that game is with your horse. And you'll find out why at some point during the game. And it's like, that sucks. Like, I wish that the game was better. I wish that thing was more fun, and I wish that I had a better time with it. But I'm happy I got a chance to experience it. I think that, it shows again the beauty of a tight single player game. And sometimes when you broaden things out, especially new games and new IPs to being open world, you wind up having to shoehorn all this other stuff within the game that it doesn't need, and it doesn't feel necessary to make a really dope and tight game. So, sadly, again, I gave this game a 2 out of 5. I think a lot of folks will come to it, and again, it's coming out in another, it's out now at this point as the time of this recording. Again, it's my opinion. Please go check it out if you want to buy it. I would say it's more of a rent than it is a buy. I would wait for it to go on sale. I would not pay full price for it. But I think it is a game that, for the visual fidelity that they have hit in the last parts of this console generation, if you're looking for something extremely pretty to like mess around with and play around it in a world, you should absolutely cop it. Because then you'll have, the chance to say that you experience what you had a chance to experience. So with that said, we're going to get up out of here. Again, if there are folks in the chat, folks here, on YouTube who have thoughts about that, please leave them in the comments below. Let me know what you thought about the game, what you thought about, all the things that I said. And please make sure that you, follow the channel and check out all that kind of stuff there. Because we hope to do more of these in the future, especially with more games coming out and with more consoles and all the other things happening in the space. So to everybody, we'll see you in a bit. Much love to everybody, and we'll see you in a few. Peace.